Patrick from Florida. Pronouns are he, him. And the question is, and I want to make sure I understand you, Patrick, is why do atheists continue to seek evidence for God? Do I have your question correct, Patrick?
Somewhat. There's a lead into that I actually wrote. It's just a short little thing I'd like to ask, specifically for Forrest as a scientist.
Well, why don't you boil it down for us? We don't want to go on a long speech, but if you can get to the core of what you'd like to talk about, let us know.
I could have already said it. One of the most prolific scientists of our time, Mikhail Kaku of string theory, said that science, which seeks evidence, deals only with things that are considered testable, reproducible, and falsifiable.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's not just him saying that, but yeah, go for it.
So that comes to it. So how do we keep asking for evidence of God?
Well, that's, I think, embedded, and there's a hidden premise there in your question that seems to be you're asserting that God is not testable or observable or falsifiable. Am I understanding you correct? Is that the logic you're saying? Because the God hypothesis is not falsifiable, therefore we should stop asking for evidence? Is that what you're asking?
No, not necessarily. Testable, reproducible. So how are you going to reproduce God in a laboratory? How are you going to falsify it?
Okay, I've got an answer. I've got an answer. I'm eager to hear what Forrest and Jim have to say, but I'll give you my best answer of how this works. So on my podcast, I've got a long-running series on faith healing. So the concept is intercessory prayer, right? Where you're asking a God to intercede on somebody's behalf. The Templeton Foundation, which is a Christian organization, sponsored and paid for what was known as the Great Prayer Study. It was a giant study. And the Templeton Foundation, again, Christian organization, but also seeking to do things above board, seeking to find the fingerprints of God through science, ran this experiment, the largest one ever done, where patients were prayed for, all sorts of good controls put on the experiments. Some were prayed for, some weren't. And the study found that not only were the people who were not prayed for no more likely to see better health outcomes than the people who were prayed for, but in at least one study where the patients who knew they were being prayed for fared worse than the patients who were either not prayed for or were prayed for, but i.e. knowing maybe it made you stress you out. So you're not testing for God directly, but you are testing the claims made in the Bible. The claim is anything you want for, pray for it, and you'll get it. And that's repeated throughout time. What would your response be there, Forrest, as a scientist? Any ideas spring to mind?
Yeah, so the thing that I think is really more important and something that people who don't participate in science get wrong a lot is when we say replicable, when we want experimental evidence to be replicable, we are talking about the evidence itself, not necessarily the entire experiment. So say, for example, forensic science, right? If we have a murder and we're trying to use science to solve that murder, that doesn't mean that we have to watch the murder happen over and over in order to have a replicable type of evidence. It means that we can take individual pieces of evidence that are testable, replicable, falsifiable, and whatnot, like, for example, blood spatter patterns, or like the depth and angle of knife wounds causing this or that kind of injury, or fingerprints. Like, these are all things that are replicable and testable and falsifiable, and all these different kinds of experimental evidence that all factor into building an inductive model of what happened. All of these things are pointing in this direction, so we can then say that this is the most likely scenario that fits this evidence. And so when we talk about things like evolution or the Big Bang or plate tectonics, or looking back through history, through archaeology, and looking at how this civilization went extinct or anything like that, these are things that obviously we can't run back the clock and watch this thing happen over and over, but we can have testable, replicable, experimental evidence on individual pieces of evidence, and those individual pieces of evidence all point in the same direction. which is where we build our scientific models from. So when you're talking about experimental evidence for a God, no, we don't have to have a replicable God built in a laboratory any more than we have to have a sun built in a laboratory in order to understand how stellar nucleosynthesis works. We just have to be able to test individual pieces, have literally any evidence for this thing that's pointing in this direction. And unfortunately, unlike real science, when it comes to theological stuff, when it comes to gods, when it comes to magic, when it comes to spirits, when it comes to angels, demons, leprechauns, unicorns, whatever, we just don't even have a scrap of evidence that points in any direction, whether it be replicable or falsifiable or not.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'd like to hear back from Patrick, but Jim, what are your thoughts? Anything you'd like to add?
Well, I was going to go with the Templeton Foundation too. And then after what both of you said, I'd just really like to point out that despite everything that Forrest and Graham just said, which is absolutely true, the only thing we're trying to prove a negative. And that's the hardest thing to do. It's not impossible, it's just difficult. And so all we need is one good, sufficient piece of evidence to prove that God exists. And that's why we're looking for that evidence, because the only thing we can do is try to prove a negative. And in the vastness of the universe and everything we don't understand about the universe and science, there might be an answer there. There might be proof of a God that we haven't seen. And that's what we're looking for. So when people come on and they go, look at the trees, or how do you think the earth formed, or any of these other things, we know how all that formed, and no God was necessary for any of it. But that doesn't mean one doesn't exist. We're still looking for that piece of evidence to prove that God exists because of how difficult it is to prove the negative for a God. Now, when it comes to the omni-God, the problem of evil pretty much disproves the omni-God. So there's got to be some other type of God
right.
that exists, because the problem of evil pretty much logically kills the omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent God.
Okay.
And we've known that since Epictetus prior to Christianity, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of Christians have heard that and said, okay, well, we won't say omni, we'll say maximal and all that stuff. They keep moving that goalpost. But Patrick, what say you to this?
So the Templeton Foundation, I get it. You got a control group and a placebo group there. The ones praying would be the control group, the placebo. Well, no, something like that. Isn't it?
That's right.
Forrest, correct me on this. Okay, so,
strictly speaking, the people not being prayed over would be the control group, but it's whatever.
You guys are referencing the Christian God, I would say, that's one guess.
More importantly, let me clarify. I want to let you speak, but more importantly, and this is the real point, we're referencing a claim made by Christians, a testable claim made by Christians. If the Bible is true, then the hundreds of times it says, pray for something and you will get it, should also be true. So we're not testing a God, we're testing a claim made by Christians. And that's the real answer, is that's what we test. So please do continue. Does that make sense?
Yes, you're focusing on a very narrow scope there. I'd say just focused on a Christian definition of a God.
No. I want to make sure you get this, Patrick. We are testing a single claim made by a large number of followers of what they say is a God. And yes, it's very narrow. Experiments, Forrest, back me up. Your experiments almost by definition have to be narrow because you want to narrow it down to one question. Can I support this with evidence or not, right? Forrest, are all experiments generally fairly narrow?
It depends. It depends on what you're doing. So like there was this really cool paper called by a guy named Platt called Strong Inference. And it was all about like try to rule out as many hypotheses as you can with the same experiment. So it doesn't have to be super narrow in terms of like what you are testing for. It's just like narrow in terms of the point. But that's also just something that was given to me in my undergrad. There's lots and lots and lots of papers and lots of scientists out there that do exactly that. There's plenty of scientists out there that have 50 papers, which are almost word for word the same thing, except this next one is changed a little little bit, and now we're going to test it this way, and now we're going to test it this way, and now we're going to and then there's other ones that are, kind of comprehensive, and it's like, we did 50 different things and only one worked, and here's why. You know what I mean? So it is fair to say that evidence should be specific. Evidence should be pointing in one direction. It doesn't necessarily have to, but like if you're going for making a claim, then you want to be honest about the fact, like, this evidence could be pointing in two different directions. So like, for example, on the whale video, right, back in the 90s, there were two major leading hypotheses. We knew that whales evolved from land animals. And so there was one group of people that were saying, like, oh, this looks like they're coming from these things called mesonychids, which are these hooved carnivores. They called them wolves with hooves. And then there was the other group over here that was saying, no, they actually look like they come from artiodactyls, which are hooved herbivores, things like deer and sheep and pigs and stuff. And up until the mid 2000s, that we had these two the evidence pointed in both directions, and we were honest about that. And then we came up with Indo-Hyas. We found Indo-Hyas, which thoroughly solidified, okay, this is the common ancestor of all whales. This is definitely an artiodactyl. Case closed. We now know what these things are. And so, like, yeah, your evidence can be somewhat broad, but your overall, like, if you have a theory, if you have a big idea that you're trying to claim, you need really, really specific shit pointing towards that, even if that specific shit is a collection of somewhat broad shit, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So Patrick, one point, Jim, real quickly, I just want to make sure that we see if Patrick understands. We are testing a single claim in this particular experience we're talking about. A single claim might be made by a group of people who believe in a single God. But if there are other claims made by other followers of other gods, we can test those too. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. Sorry, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's your definition of God, Patrick?
Yeah, there you go.
Because if ours is, if what we've already talked about hasn't covered your definition, then I think we'd like to address your definition.
I would say that, from a human perspective, we would be in the position of an ant to a human, like the ant being the human and the human being the God. An ant can't understand the mind of the human, the art of the human, the love of the human, the depths of what it is of humanity, what it is to be human. So I would say,
so we can't. So are you saying we can't understand anything about this God at all? We can't conceive of it. We can't understand it. That's just a simple question. Is that your argument?
No, sir.
Okay. So can we or can we not understand? Are we ants or are we not ants?
It would be like Einstein indicated that we would only be able to perceive God in a limited way. You know what I'm saying?
That's very convenient for your argument, isn't it, though? Isn't it convenient to say, well, in all the areas where we can test claims, we are but ants, so we don't understand. But when I get into discussions, I have to say that we can understand, because if I say we can't understand at all, then we become just objects to this God. We have no moral compass. We have no culpability to following the God's rules or not. Therefore, any punishment this God might mete out upon us would be unjustifiable. So you know that you have to say that we could understand part of God, but when we start talking about details, you wanted to say that we're ants. So which is it? Can we understand the rules that God gives us, or are we ants and we aren't responsible? We are just nothing more than dust in the wind to him.
I have a follow-up question whenever you answer that, Patrick.
For me, can I say something? Can I say something about this? See,
I prefer you answer Graham's question.
Hey, real quick, I like this about, I'm down with the theory of evolution as science fact at this point. But with the whale issue, didn't they Hold on.
Wait. We asked you a question. You wanted to have it both ways. We're both ants, but we also can kind of understand, i.e., you want to be able to say we can't understand because that makes it easy for us to ignore and hide under the table any sort of evidence we have that claims in the Bible or whatever God is saying is false, but you also want to say that we can understand, presumably, so this God can hold us morally responsible. I need a definitive answer from you. Can we understand what this God wants us to do or not?
In some part, I would say so, because we've been given this gift called a human brain where we can discern and come up, determine our own morality. We can, I think the gift would be a human brain where we can deduce things on our own through science, philosophy.
Okay. Sure. So the answer is yes. We can understand if this God wants something from us. We can understand that. Forrest, you had a follow-up question?
Yeah, the big thing for me is that, Patrick, you're saying that like we are but ants and we can't understand the mind of God and the purpose of God and the ways of God and all these different things. But that doesn't imply that we can't know that this God exists. Ants certainly don't know what I'm thinking. They certainly don't have the capacity to grasp the kind of things that even a child would think about. But they certainly will know that humans exist. Otherwise, they wouldn't bite us and stuff when we're messing with them. And so, like, they understand that big, crazy apes are real. And so for us, we can understand the scope of the entire universe. We can understand things that are tens of billions of over 10 billion years old. Shouldn't say tens because the universe is 13.8, but it doesn't matter. Like we can understand stuff that is billions of years old. We can understand the scale of galaxies. We can calculate like the shit that is like beyond the scope of human imagination. We can actually break it down and understand it and calculate it and come to terms with it. We don't have to know every little thing about this God. We should at least be able to know that it exists, and we don't. So that, to me, is a reason to not believe in it. If I don't have a reason to believe that a thing exists, then I'm not going to.
And ants could, in this metaphor, ants could understand that it is, in fact, immoral for the human to burn them with a magnifying glass or step on them just for giggles or pour hot aluminum down their nest just to see what their nests look like. Can understand that is not good things to happen, that is, immoral things to happen to them by the God. And so it sounds like you're saying that we could also know things that are immoral. So when we look at the Bible and we go, oh, look, God commanded humans to commit genocide, then we can go, wait a minute, how is an omnipotent being, which is what you're describing in the ant to human metaphor, unable to deal with the Canaanites himself? Why does he have to force humans to do it for him? Because that means he's not, by definition, omnipotent. And so what makes that okay? What makes it impossible for us to understand that is immoral?
We'll keep in mind, Patrick already granted to us that we can understand the mind of God. So Patrick, getting back to Jim's earlier point, what do you actually believe that you know about what your God, presumably you believe there is a God, what your God wants out of humans? What does your God want?
How would I know that?
Okay, so if you don't know what God wants and you can't determine that he's exists or not, then why do you care? Your question to us when you called in was, why do atheists continue to seek evidence for God? Yet you are now saying that, well, maybe we can understand what the God wants, but I don't know what he wants and we can't detect him. So isn't this God you're describing something that would be the same as a God that doesn't exist?
Well, for myself, I like the elegance of the pantheism, the God of Einstein and Spinoza, but however, my pantheism is unique unto myself. I conceived of it without any knowledge.
But why should we care about that? Why should we care about your conception of some God that makes you happy if you can't show that it's actually real?
The universe is very real.
Okay. All right. So Forrest and Jim, I think we might be approaching God is the universe argument. Do either of you find that interesting in any way?
No. So I would ask you, Patrick, like, how do you tell the difference between a God that you cannot detect and cannot know and a God that doesn't exist?
I say we can dimly perceive the universe. We don't. That all this.
Nobody said we didn't, and that isn't what I asked you.
All this.
Yeah, Patrick, you're trying to have it both ways here. You keep saying we can dimly perceive, and maybe we can. Give me your single best piece of evidence that establishes that the God that you believe in is actually real and is supernatural. Let me clarify.
I would like to. Can I actually get a word in? You all each three.
No, not really, because we've heard a lot of these calls before, and we've been on the phone with you for 20 minutes now, and you're vacillating back and forth between, you can't know, and sort of woo claims about, Spinoza's God is the universe sort of thing. Quite frankly, I don't know. I can't speak for Jim and Forrest. I don't care about any God claims where the end result is, meh, do what you want, or it's the universe. There is no desire on the part of this God, right? Because those gods don't start creating people who want to take over my government and take away healthcare rights from women and all of those sorts of things. I care about where the rubber hits the road. And if you believe in a God that you can't even really know exists or care to know what it wants, then it's utterly boring to me. What about you, Jim? Do you find any of this? Is there a line you want to go down here?
Well, I find Spinoza's God, the concept of Spinoza's God, to be kind of a cop-out, right? Because there's no difference between Spinoza's God and what we understand the universe to be in science. And therefore, there is no God. We're just redefining the word God to mean universe or the body of knowledge we call science. And that's a cop-out. And so if you want to go that route and just cop out that way, that's fine. But you don't have any evidence for the God that you believe in. And so we don't have any reason to believe in the God that you do. And that's what we're looking for, is evidence for a God, not evidence that science exists and we're just going to call it God. That's a useless word game to me.
All right. So I agree with you, Patrick. I do want to give you your fair shot. What is your single best piece of evidence that there is a supernatural God that we should care about?
Can I get 2 minutes to speak without getting interrupted?
No, I don't want whining and complaining. I just, somebody who knows their shit, for pardon my English, can give me the elevator pitch. They can walk up and say, X is true and it's testable, right? It doesn't take 2 minutes. If you need 2 minutes of explaining to give me a claim that is testable, that other people can go out and test and determine that what you're claiming is true, then you probably need to go back and refine that. Can you give me the elevator pitch? Can you give me the statement, the claim that we can go test to prove that something along the lines of there is this omnipotent God or a supernatural God that wants me to do X is true? Can you just name it?
So you want a very simple thing. I mean, you want to simplify God. It's like atheists want to simplify God into like the same God like a Christian God is just going to pop out of the sky, and announce himself on all radio.
Let me model the answer for you. Patrick. If I were a Christian and I was asked this question, I would say something like, the claims in the Bible are true. Or I have seen miracles. This is what I'm talking about. People who understand what they're talking about can summarize. I'm not going to say you're going to settle them answer, but this is where you start the conversation. So that's all I'm saying, right? I'm not saying you can explain the universe in 30 seconds, but if you need 2 minutes to tell me I've seen miracles or I had a dream, then you're confused. So what's the summary? Give me the top level. What is the piece of evidence that you think is the most convincing?
What I say is one piece of evidence to define God. Are you serious?
I didn't say that. So, I said, what piece of evidence do you find most convincing?
Yeah, okay, maybe we can compromise.
Sure, go ahead, Forrest.
I understand it's probably frustrating. It's you talking to 3 different people, and the issue is that we do this shit for a living, right? We listen to people talk about their gods and their beliefs all the time. And so something that might be to you pretty insightful and what you think is a really big idea is something that I almost guarantee you we've heard 30 times. And so what I want you to try here, going back to the same thing, if I'm talking about evolution, right? There's no freaking way that I can give you the best possible case for everything I know about evolution in a minute. But I can give you like a good summary of like, this is what it is that I'm actually talking about. And this is a reason, a solid reason why I can say that that's real. And so that's all we're at. We're not asking you to summarize your God down into anything. We're not asking you to give us everything you got in a tiny bit of time. We're not trying to box you in to make it that you have to straw man yourself so we have an easier position. None of that. We don't want to have you give us a sermon for 2 minutes and explain everything you think you know about this stuff, and then have us have to then cut you off 1,000 times and interrupt you on every little thing that's a problem, and then nobody gets anywhere. So can we maybe make a compromise? If the other hosts agree, can we do like a 1 minute clock? And
sure,
we won't talk. We won't say a word for 1 full minute, 60 seconds. Tell us what the God is that you believe in and why you believe that God is supernatural and real and all these things. And I swear to Glob, dude, if you just try to tell me that it's the universe and that this God is everywhere in the universe, then I will actually be cross with you and be very bored, because that is exactly what we're accusing you of doing. I'm hoping you don't do that thing.
Absolutely. So if we could get, I believe we can still put that clock up on the screen if we have it, but I'll turn it over to Patrick. Patrick, you have 60 seconds. What is the single best, not the only or all, but what is the single best piece of evidence that convinces you the most that there is a God?
Okay, you all have monopolized this for at least 80% of the call, but I'll just take that as part of my first 10 seconds. But, you know, he has a problem. Jim has a problem with the universe being called God. The universe already has a name, as if the universe were God, you know, because humans define the universe as the universe, then the universe couldn't be God. That's hilarious. Okay, and beyond that, Forrest is assuming he knows more about evolution than me, but I probably know just equally as much. And then, I mean, but the universe as God, that would take volumes to describe, not 60 seconds. It's not, y'all want to oversimplify God, but the universe as God, you'd have to go through philosophy, science, maybe some esoteric.
And that's your time, Patrick. Here's the thing, dude. Like, this is what sucks so bad. We gave you a full minute of us not speaking. You spent the entire time bitching. Like, you spent the first 10 seconds complaining that you had 3 people talking over you, when that is our job, to correct issues that you say. And then you spent the other 50 seconds saying, you believe this and this and this, and that guy believes this and this and this, and I know this. And you, for 60 whole fucking seconds, you never actually explain what God you're even talking about. You just complained about us. If we ask you what you believe and your statement starts with, you guys think, you're not doing anybody any fucking good. Least of all yourself.
It's worse, Forrest. It's worse. He actually thinks that he knows as much about evolution as you do.
Maybe he does. Maybe he does, but I never claim that I know more than him. I just use it as an example. Like, and it sounds like this dude's got an issue with people just speaking articulately about whatever thing that they think they're trying to pull something over on him. I just related it to back something that I'm comfortable with. I wouldn't have related it back to like computer science or something that I don't know shit about.
Yeah, like, okay, Francis Collins, right? Head of the Human Genome Project, amazing scientist.
Are you saying you know more about Francis Collins than me?
Also a devout Christian, right? If I ask Francis Collins, what is the single best piece of evidence that convinces you evolution is true? He would look me in the face and say, the genetic record. Boom. Mm-hmm. Like, and that is the starting point of any sort of conversation. That's what we're asking you for, Patrick, is what is the single best piece of evidence? And literally, it was nothing but whining, complaining, and bitching. I mean, you even admitted it. My first 10 seconds are just going to be complaining about something. So I think we're going to move on.
I think that's a good idea.
I appreciate the call, Patrick, but my personal interpretation, guys, is there's a lot of people who want mystery. They want navel gazing, that they want their God to be something that you have to discover and it's a personal truth and all of that. So there's sort of this woo God. But that kind of bores me at some point because, we've got people out here trying to take over our government who are going to turn it into a theocracy because they literally believe there is a God, they know it's mind, and that God wants them to do X, right? And that's what matters. If there's just some God that you think that this glass is God, great. What does the glass want me to do? Nothing. I don't care. Boring. How about you guys?
Yeah, I'm really glad that we gave him that full minute because I could tell already that the argument was going to be, you guys wouldn't even let me speak. You wouldn't let me present the God. Every time I tried to talk about God, you just did the atheist thing and you asked me to define every single term and you wouldn't let me even get anything out. And here you had the chance, bro. And you spent the entire time complaining about what you think we think about things that we didn't even talk about half the time. And like, just, man, that's so fucking lazy. And I just hope that Patrick tries a little bit harder next time he calls in because he almost certainly will.
Yeah,
I would like to actually hear what he thinks.
I was going to tell Patrick, don't ever go on Shark Tank. Because when you're asked for your 60-second pitch and you do that, you're not getting any investors.
You know more about business and evolution than me.